Gurgaon has 3 stories to tell, and all of them intertwined. The story of relatively progressive land acquisition, entrepreneurial farmers and crumbling civic infrastructure. Before massive office complexes came up here, Gurgaon was like many of Haryana's villages, nondescript. But what set it apart from the rest was that it was merely 30 kilometers from South Delhi. The first high-profile land acquisition came in 1977 with the establishment of the Haryana Urban Development Authority of Huda and the acquisition of land by Sanjay Gandhi to start an automobile company. Today, that plot is owned by Maruti Suzuki.
Made the environment conducive for people to come and do business there. Initially it started with industrialization. Of course, the pioneer was Maruti in the early 80s, and Maruti brought in a lot of ancillary industries. But then along with that came Hero, Honda and others. And then of course, as a result, these are 2 giants in the automobile industry. So they brought their own ancillary industries and all. But that was a starting point. Then you have tier 2, tier 3 and other industries came. Along with that, I think the private players played a very major role.
Almost at the same time began the real estate boom. The Haryana Development and Regulation of Urban Areas Act 1975 allowed private developers to buy land directly from agricultural and other landowners and develop these to build residential colonies.
Protests from farmers come when government gets involved in land acquisition. So that's why you're seeing all over the country. So in Haryana, the policy was there that they would acquire 10% of the land. But practically it didn't happen, and that's for the better. Otherwise there would have been problems with the farmers. So once developers or any industrialist is allowed to deal directly with the villager or the landowner, it's always easier. There are never problems. That's the simple reason why there have been no problems. And secondly, why I say they've been proactive is, the good part is because the market was dynamic and it kept changing, the government kept changing its policies according to the changes in the market. And very often they used to call all the developers in a group and discuss that the new things happening and modify and amend the government policies accordingly.
But what has been a standout in Huda's land policy is the R&R or Resettlement and Rehabilitation clauses. Eligible landowners are paid 21,000 rupees a year per acre for 33 years, and this sum is increased by 750 rupees every year. The centre's new draft land acquisition bill has adopted this concept as well. The numbers may be very different. Landowners also get back 20% of the acquired land once developed. Besides this, in case of government projects, at least one family member is in short employment. But one controversial provision of the Haryana policy is the no litigation incentive. An additional amount of 20% is paid to those landowners who promise not to challenge the acquisition in court. While this may be a way to reduce litigation, many look at this as closing legal options for the farmers.
Farmers are by and large entrepreneurial, and they are not so poverty-stricken. So when they get this money, some of them, of course, invested in flats or furniture or new cars and blow some. But a lot of them then go to distant parts of the country where land is available very cheap, and in some cases very fertile lands available very cheap in deep Madhya Pradesh or Chhattisgarh or Jharkhand or even as far as Manipur. So they go and either set up farms there. So in a way they improve agriculture in those areas. They take their sense of entrepreneurship there. But having said that, I think a lot more transparency has to be brought in zoning policies and how government can change the land change the use of land when it's acquired, to what purposes is it put. In fact, the government has had some adverse judgments from Punjab and Haryana High Court because of that. So those areas need reform.
Politics of land mafia, builders and miners. We are not speaking of minerals here, we are speaking of mining of stones. This has been a principal factor in Haryana's political economy. The leaders do not need to draw money from ordinary people because they get their principal money from land deals, from auctioning of stone mines and other quarries, and from builders. And that is why Haryana politics is so much dominated by what happens in the shadow of Delhi, by what happens in the shadow of Chandigarh, and along the GT road which connects Delhi and Chandigarh. That has led to a vested interest which continues to dominate Haryana politics.
And this is not just conjecture. Recently, the Punjab and Haryana High Court came down heavily on real estate giant DLF and the state government, stating that there existed a nexus between the government and the company. It also quashed the land acquisition in 2 cases, including that of Haryana's first IT Special Economic Zone in Silokhera. Now, the lease of 5 acres of Panchayat land in Ullavas village to the Rajiv Gandhi Charitable Trust to build an eye hospital and research centre has also come under the scanner. So has the issue of compensation in case of the Rajiv Gandhi Education City, which is coming up near Sonipat.
We've acquired land in 3 phases. In 2 phases, there were no issue. As prices rose, the quest for getting higher compensation also arose. They can't really pay crores of rupees which a commercial developer can do. So we have to keep price at a level where aspiration of the farmer is met, while we are also able to invite and attract the best of the institutions. We encourage all land developers to buy at market price land from the farmer. Net result is that the farmer gains, the developer gains, and the competition sort of stabilizes the prices also. And then we proceed to grant any change of land uses. Isolated cases apart, and I'm sure both the judgment that you speak about, if you find out, both have been stayed by the Supreme Court. So they are now sub judice. But there is no question of any nexus. Yes, we want everybody to be a participative partner, and there's nothing wrong with it.
And private sector players have been participative and self-serving. Within Gurgaon's massive gated colonies, there are few problems. Diesel gensets and bore wells that are draining the underground aquifer are expensive but do ensure round-the-clock power and water supply.
This is a fair criticism, but for our projects, because they are our customers and we are responsible to them, so we give them bore wells or power backup or whatever is required to keep them happy, which is actually the customer is paying much more than what he actually should if the government was providing the power. So because diesel is again becoming expensive, backup power is now generators. So ultimately, it's all adding up to inflation and costs and whatever we talk about. And actually, the maintenance charges of some of the buildings are so high that now our customers are finding it difficult to pay it. And if diesel prices go up further or power supply becomes worse, we don't have an answer. But we provide them the facility. If they want it, they take it. If they don't want it, they don't take it. But the governments in Haryana and all over should pay more emphasis to electricity and water. It's a big, big concern.
Huda was supposed to build the infrastructure binding together the city, and that's been way behind the curve. Gurgaon is a city without a centre, without a drainage and sewage system, without arterial roads, and one that has no pavements.
If you look at the way Gurgaon has come up, it's not a city, it's just a bunch of gated colonies and buildings strung together. Or as a friend of mine said, it's just a bunch of CLUs strung together. CLU, as you know, is a famous acronym for change of land use. So somebody buys farmland, gets change of land use to residential or commercial. So it has no soul, no center, very little by way of public spaces. Malls are its only public spaces.
Haryana has pockets of prosperity. Gurgaon is there, Faridabad is there, some other cities are there. But there are also regions and pockets which are still very backward. So if one were to say that overall per capita is high because you have very, very different class of people staying in Gurgaon, they bring up the average. But it is not to say that there are pockets in which the per capita income is low. So I think Haryana would need, they are doing as they go along, but they would need to do more.
It's not surprising that urban slums are emerging in the heart of the Millennium City, and the city's municipal corporation, which is just 2 years old, finds that it has very limited power to administer the city. There are many lessons to learn from Gurgaon for a rapidly urbanizing Haryana. As development spreads and new cities emerge from what was once farmland, pressure on the administration to deliver the basic public services will mount. Next week on the Ministers of Change, we put the spotlight on Haryana's industrial policy and the push on building statewide infrastructure. We also examine what the state needs to do to climb up the social development ladder.